Good evening. Tonight we begin with a question that has followed history for centuries. Did Nero burn Rome?
It is one of the most persistent accusations in Roman history. That toll.
A story repeated so often that it feels settled.
And yet when we examine the evidence, the certainty begins to fade.
What we are exploring tonight is not a legend, but a moment of crisis.
A city built largely of wood, cloth, and narrow streets.
And an empire that needed explanations as much as it needed order.
The fire of Rome was real. The question is how responsibility was assigned.
Tonight, we will not start with blame.
We will start with context.
This is the story of Nero, and of a city that burned.
And of how history decides who carries the fire. Before the fire, Rome was already a city under constant risk. It had grown rapidly without central planning, absorbing people faster than it could absorb infrastructure.
So was built into daily life.
Yes, most residential buildings were made of wood, with fabric roofs, shared walls, and narrow alleys between them. Open flames were used constantly for cooking, heating, and light.
Which means fires were common.
Small fires happened almost daily. They were part of urban routine. What made the Great Fire different was not that a fire started, but that it could not be contained.
There were no real fire prevention systems.
Very limited ones. Rome relied more on reaction than prevention. Once wind, density, and materials aligned, the city became vulnerable.
And Nero was already emperor at this point.
Yes, he had ruled for more than a decade when the fire broke out. At this stage, Nero was not yet the figure of excess that later sources would describe.
So his reputation was still forming.
Exactly. His early reign was marked by administrative continuity and guidance from senior advisors. He was seen as young, ambitious, and interested in culture, but not yet dangerous.
And Rome itself was already under pressure.
Yes. Social tension, inequality, and urban overcrowding were increasing. The city was functioning but barely.
So when the fire begins, it finds a city ready to burn.
A city where disaster was not a surprise, only a matter of timing. The fire began in the commercial area, near the Circus Maximus. It started at night, when visibility was low, and response was slow. The shops in that district stored flammable goods including oils, fabrics, and wooden structures.
So the location mattered.
Very much. Once the fire took hold, it spread rapidly through adjacent neighborhoods. Wind conditions and narrow streets allowed flames to move faster than people. Firefighting efforts were fragmented and ineffective. In some areas, attempts to stop the fire were abandoned to save lives instead.
Meaning containment was impossible.
Yes. The fire burned for days, destroying large sections of the city. Entire districts were reduced to ash, leaving thousands without shelter. Panic, displacement, and rumors followed quickly.
Rumors often look for a single cause.
Exactly. In moments of mass trauma, explanations tend to simplify. People looked for intention, where there may have been accident, and attention soon turned toward the emperor himself.
Because power attracts blame.
Yes, especially when suffering demands explanation. At this point, accusation had not yet become history. Oh, on me. But the conditions for myth were already in place. In the days following the fire, Nero returned to Rome and took visible control of the response. Ancient sources describe him opening public spaces to shelter the displaced. Food supplies were organized and temporary housing was arranged.
So his first actions were practical.
Yes, administrative rather than symbolic. He also initiated new urban regulations. Almost immediately, building heights were limited, wider streets were mandated, and the use of stone was encouraged.
A different Rome was planned.
Yes, the fire became the catalyst for the first large-scale urban redesign in Roman history. This reconstruction required authority, resources, and long-term control, and that is where perception began to shift.
Because rebuilding also means power.
Exactly. Large-scale reconstruction creates winners and losers. Some land was reclaimed by the state, while private owners faced new restrictions. Rumors began to circulate that the fire had served imperial interests.
Not evidence, but suspicion.
Correct. Suspicion grows faster than documentation. The narrative shifted from disaster to intention. 1. From accident to benefit.
And that shift changes how actions are remembered.
Yes, the same decisions that stabilized the city also fed later accusations. From this point on, Nero is no longer only managing Rome. He is managing how Rome interprets what happened. He organized as the city rebuilt. A second process unfolded in parallel. Rome began to search for meaning in the destruction, not how the fire started, but why it had happened.
Disaster rarely stays neutral.
Correct. In moments of collective loss, explanation becomes a political necessity. Rumors spread that agents had been seen preventing firefighting efforts. These claims were impossible to verify, but difficult to silence.
So the fire requires intention.
Yes, intention is easier to grasp than coincidence. Attention gradually shifted from structural causes to human actors, and eventually toward groups already viewed as marginal or disruptive.
A familiar pattern.
Very. Blame consolidates social order when uncertainty threatens it. At the same time, Nero's public image continued to fragment. His artistic interests, once tolerated, were now reinterpreted as signs of excess.
Context reshapes behavior.
Exactly. Actions that once seemed eccentric began to appear threatening. Later, historians would amplify this contrast, writing backward from collapse to cause. The fire became a lens through which all of Nero's behavior was judged.
And from that point, the story hardens.
Yes. What begins as rumor gradually solidifies into narrative, and narrative, once repeated, becomes history. After the fire and the rebuilding, Nero's position began to erode from within the elite. Support did not collapse suddenly. It thinned out. Senatos, generals, and administrators grew increasingly distant.
Because trust was gone.
Yes. Once confidence in leadership weakens, interpretation turns hostile. Nero's artistic pursuits, particularly his public performances, became a point of tension. In Roman political culture, visibility was power, but dignity was restraint.
And he crossed that line.
In the eyes of many, yes. At the same time, financial pressure increased due to reconstruction costs and military demands. Taxation rose. Confiscations increased. Resentment followed.
Which creates conspiracies.
Or at least the conditions for them. And the most significant was the Pisonian conspiracy, involving members of the senatorial class. Its goal was to remove Nero and restore what conspirators considered stable governance.
And the Seneca.
Seneca was implicated, whether actively or symbolically remains debated. He was ordered to take his own life, an act framed as dignified obedience.
Which marks a turning point.
Yes. After this, Nero ruled without his former moderating influences. Power became narrower, more suspicious, and more isolated.
So the system begins to close around him.
And once that happens, reversal becomes unlikely. By the final months of his reign, Nero's authority had largely evaporated. Support from the Senate was gone, and loyalty within the army was no longer assured. Provincial governors began to distance themselves from Rome.
So power stops responding.
Yes. Orders lose weight when belief disappears. Revolts in Gaul and Hispania signaled that imperial authority was fragmenting. The Senate eventually declared him an enemy of the state.
Which leaves no legal refuge.
None. From that moment, Nero was no longer protected by office. He fled Rome with a small group of remaining supporters. Ancient accounts describe hesitation, fear, and an inability to imagine life without authority.
The role had consumed the person.
Yes. Emperor and individual had become inseparable. As capture became imminent, Nero faced a final decision, one shaped by Roman notions of honor, punishment, and spectacle.
Not all endings are chosen freely.
Some are constrained by the absence of alternatives. Nero's life ended outside the city he once ruled. With power gone, reputation followed soon after.
And history takes over.
Yes, what remains is not the man, but the version that survived retelling.
Before we close tonight, let's take a moment and welcome Margaret. Margaret, for those who want to understand Nero beyond the accusations, where would you point them?
Thank you, Clara. This is one of those figures where separating evidence from narrative really matters. A very clear place to begin is Nero. The End of a Dynasty by Miriam Griffin. It examines Nero within the political structures of his time, rather than judging him through later moral lenses. The book is careful with sources, especially Tacitus and Suetonius, and makes clear where certainty ends and interpretation begins.
So it helps the reader slow down the story.
Exactly. It replaces spectacle with context.
Thank you, Margaret, for sharing that with us tonight.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So we return to the question that opened tonight's program.
Did Nero burn Rome?
Based on the available evidence, there is no proof that he did. The fire appears consistent with an urban accident in a city built to ignite.
So the image survives without the facts.
Yes. Nero did not need to start the fire to be consumed by it. His later actions, his isolation, and the accounts written after his fall shaped a story that endured.
History remembers patterns more easily than circumstances.
And power magnifies those patterns.
So what remains is not certainty, but responsibility.
Responsibility for how stories are told, repeated, and fixed in memory.
Please like, subscribe, and comments that we read any of your conclusions. And thank you for staying with us tonight.